I'm really not much of a tradition guy, or at least never thought of myself as a tradition guy. As I get a little older, I find that I'm becoming a little more traditional. But there are certain things that come as Christmas begins to ramp up that I just kind of found myself doing every year. Like there are certain movies that I watch. Maybe you watch some of them too. You know, I have to always watch It's a Wonderful Life. You know, everybody go, "Aw," you know. Yeah, and other great movies like Christmas Vacation, you know, and who couldn't, you know, love 24 Hours of Ralphie, of A Christmas Story, you know, on TBS. Yeah, that's good stuff too. And I've started a new tradition. Last year, I went by Chick-fil-A right around Christmas time, and they have a peppermint chocolate chip shake that is worth starting a tradition for, right? This is just the second year in a row on it, but it is so good. And there are certain songs we always sing right around Christmas. Isn't that correct? I mean, we all got to get into this deal of certain songs that we have to hear. And I've kind of made some observations. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it seems like people in Christmas music kind of fall into two different categories. There are those of you who start listening to Christmas music just as soon as the Thanksgiving dishes are pushed away. And then on goes on your I started to say stereo, hi-fi stereo, that kind of dates me, doesn't it? But whatever music device that you have, it starts playing Christmas music. Others of you kind of follow a different path, and it's whenever, Cracker Barrel starts putting out their Christmas decorations, which I think is about July 25th, you know, and then you guys start your Christmas music at that time. I want to see how well you know some of the Christmas songs that we play. There's all these lists that come out. I kind of like listening to them or looking at some of the lists. And there's the 100 top Christmas songs and the 100 top Christmas carols and things. I want you to shout out when you recognize this first song, if you would. Can't you just picture the Peanuts gang dance along on the stage? I would start doing that, but I'd fall off the stage. All right, that's actually number 71 in the 100 top favorite Christmas songs, all right? See if you can recognize this one. What now? All right. And some of you probably danced to that when you were in high school also. How many of you did that? It's in church. I know you're not supposed to dance, but you know, we're not Baptists, so it's okay. Okay? All right. So that's another one. That's actually number 7 on the Christmas list, top 100 Christmas songs. And this next one, at least Chubby Checker's version of that is number 7 on it. It leads us to a song that I think is going to kind of get into what we're doing tonight. And it's a song that's celebrating its 200th anniversary this year. Listen to this song right here. I love this song. Listen to it as it plays. I don't know whether you realize that this song has some Muskogee ties. Did you know that? It was written by Franz Gruber in actually 1816. And then it was performed for the very first time when a guy by the name of Frederick Moore put it to the guitar actually first because their organ was out in the church in Austria where it was. But Franz Gruber had a descendant, and we have an army base that's just close out here called Camp Gruber. It's named after Brigadier General Edmund Gruber, who was quite the musician also. He was the head of field artillery for the Army for a number of years, was the headquarters or head general at Fort Sill for a number of years all over the world. But he was also a bit of a composer too, just like his forefather, Franz Gruber. There's a song that he did that's kind of famous, Over Hill, Over Dale, Hit the Dusty Trail, the caissons go marching along. The Army song was written by Franz Gruber's great, sometime grandson, General Edmund Gruber. But this song has such haunting things. I love it on the cello. And when it comes to Christmas, Christmas isn't really much about silent nights as it is about the interruption of 400 years of silent nights. The Christmas story, as you and I know it, is found in the Bible. The Bible is, we sometimes call it the book, but it's actually a collection of 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. And just on the last book of the Old Testament, which is a book called Malachi, 4 short chapters, we read it and you turn the page and 400 years goes by. 400 years. Malachi finishes his book and the curtain closes on the Old Testament and God goes silent. Silent. 400 years. No prophets speak. No scripture was written. Where did God go in that 400 years? I mean, did he just kind of get tired of the human race and said, man, I'm done with them for a period of time. I got to get over them. They're just too tough to be around. I mean, did he decide, I'll wait till I get in a better mood to deal with them? 400 years of silence. And then the Christmas story. And that's where it begins. So what was God doing? Where did he go during those 400 years? And why the silent nights? I think it's a very important question because I think many of you that gathered here tonight for our Christmas Eve service in the evening are facing some silent nights in your night. You feel like it's almost a night that's been unending where God seems to be absent in your life. Now, I think there's 3 questions I want to ask you before we start. And I think if you answer yes to one of these 3 questions, then I think tonight is especially for you. The first question is this. Have you ever asked the question, God, where are you? Where are you, God? You just seem silent. Are you absent? Have you gotten tired of me? Have you just decided to step out of my life for a while? Am I not worthy? What is it? Second question is, have you ever felt like God answers other people's prayers but is silent to yours? Doesn't speak. You breathe those prayers constantly, day and night, and yet God doesn't seem to answer them at all. And third, has God's silence ever caused you to wonder if there's even really a God? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then I believe that God drew you here tonight because you need to understand some things about silent nights. We're going to go on a very small journey tonight, and I believe this journey will help you to answer 2 other questions. One is, what is God doing in the silence? And secondly, what do we do when we feel like God is silent? In those seasons where God has seemingly gotten silent, what's he doing? Is he just kind of puttering around in heaven, or has he disappeared altogether? What God does in that silent time is important for you to understand. And here's the bottom line, and really the reason we're here tonight. I want you to never, ever confuse God's silence with God's absence. Never confuse God's silence with a lack of action on God's part. In those seasons where seemingly God has gone silent in your life, our tendency is to go one of 2 ways. We either attempt to control life ourselves because God is silent, and so we squeeze down on everything we can do, and we just try to control every circumstance around us, and it doesn't go very well. And so oftentimes we conclude there really isn't a God because of the times when we think God is silent. And in those moments, if we're not careful, it can be some of the greatest moments of regret in your life, where you step back thinking that the silence means that God is absent and he's not at work at all. In fact, the Bible is full of stories over and over again of people who, in the midst of God's silence, confuse God's silence with his absence, and they try to control life, and they conclude that God wasn't there, and it leads to story after story after story of regret. And if we had time tonight, I could probably walk the aisles, and you could share some of those stories of regret from your life too. And yet on the other hand, there are moments when God seems silent, and if we lean into him, if we trust him, even when it doesn't seem to make any sense, when there are moments when it seems like that God grows us up in the midst of silence, there are moments of the greatest displays of faith in our life. And I also think I can go down through the aisles tonight, and I could talk to you and hand you a microphone, and you could tell a story of when you felt like God was very, very silent. He was not speaking. It just seemed like nothing. And yet you leaned into him. You trusted him in some way, trusted in promises that he had given to you, and things became miraculous. The greatest displays of faith within our life. Those are moments when God becomes most real. So never, ever confuse God's silence with God's absence. The Christmas story isn't some little sentimental story that's high above pain and the reality of this hardness of this life. Actually, the Christmas story tells us, or at least the story behind the story of Christmas, is that when God goes silent, he's not absent and he's not inactive. In fact, he's very active. So here's two questions that I want us to answer before we leave tonight. First one is this: what does God do in silence? And the second one is, what you and I do in that silence. And so to do that, we need to go first to the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, that we mentioned. Malachi is a prophet in Judah, 4 small chapters, but the overarching theme of everything that Malachi says through the whole thing is an answer to the question of Israel saying, I don't know where you are, God. And in chapter 1, verse 2 of Malachi, he says these words. He says, I have loved you, says the Lord. I have loved you. And through the rest of the book, he approaches that theme over and over, back to back. And it's interesting, there's the Hebrew verb in this, and I don't want to get technical, but the Hebrew verb in this is kind of an interesting verb. It's the idea of action that has taken place in the past that continues into the present and onto the future. And so when God says to you and I in Malachi, I have loved you, even in the midst, I'm preparing you, I'm going to go silent, 400 years of silence. But I want you to know that I love you. Even in the midst of the silence, even in the midst of when you feel like I'm absent, not there, I want you to understand that I still love you. You are still very, very important to me. And so he says, I'm going to continue to love you. Now, I don't know what you're facing tonight. I don't know the seasons of silent nights that you may be facing or what it looks like. But what I do know is this, is that the creator of the universe looks at you and you're very important. And he's loved you. He's loved you in the past, and he loves you right now in the midst of the silence, and he will never, ever, 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 can I add that one more time? Never, ever stop loving you. And in the little book of Malachi, he's basically saying, in the future, I'm going to bring another prophet like Elijah. And he's going to prepare the way for the Messiah by turning the hearts of the children towards the Father and the hearts of the fathers towards their children. And Malachi puts down his pen, the curtain closes, and God goes silent. When God breaks the silence again, he dispatches angels to talk with different humans, inviting them to be a part of his silent breaking ceremony. And the first person he talks to is a priest by the name of Zechariah. He and his wife have longed for children for years, but silence. God has not answered their prayer. And while he's serving in the temple as a priest, an angel appears to him and says, hey, Zech, I think that's probably what the angel said. Hey, Zech, you and your wife are going to have a baby. And Zechariah says, no way, my wife's an old lady. She can't have children. Now, you didn't laugh at that because you're saying next to your wife or girlfriend, and so you're not about to laugh at that. But, he's basically, that's what he says. It's not possible. My wife's old. She's past the time she can have children. I'm past the time we can have children. And the angel says to Zechariah, yes way, dude. I want to tell you, you're going to have a baby. And just to make sure you understand that, you're going to be silent until the baby's born. So God breaks the silence by commanding somebody else to be silent for a period of time. Then another angel comes by Gabriel. And he comes and talks to Mary and says, hey, you're going to have this baby. And Mary is overwhelmed and said, I don't understand how this is possible. It's not a moment of doubt for her. She just can't comprehend how it's possible. And the angel tells her about it. Then her betrothed, Joseph, says, I can't marry her. She's pregnant. I know it's not my baby. I can't marry her. I'm going to divorce her. And an angel appears to him and says, hey, listen, this baby that's about to be born is the Messiah, and you're going to be the father, the earthly father to it. And so the angel says, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him what? The song we just heard. They will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. So what was God doing in that 400 years of silence? Whatever he was doing in that silence, we need to understand for when we think God is silent in our life. So in this 400 years, Malachi closes, and in your Bible, there's not a page that separates it till you turn to the New Testament. Or if you've got an electronic version, you just swipe your hand through it, and it goes from Malachi right to Matthew. 400 years there. What was happening? One of the things that we need to see is that God is not inactive in the midst of silence. Let me just say three things very quickly that God accomplished in 400 years to prepare the world for the Messiah's coming and for the church to be able to grow and become a real reality. The first thing, he brought about a ruler by the name of Alexander the Great. Most historians call him probably the biggest, largest, best military strategist the world has ever seen. And one of the things he did is he put the end of the dynasty that ruled the world for many, many years, and the Persian dynasty, and he wiped it out. He demolished it. But he did something different. When his armies, in the short time that he conquered the known world, he brought with him school teachers. Kind of an odd thing to be embedded with an army. But Alexander the Great said, whenever I conquer the world, I want to be able to have a common language in which I can be able to communicate things, a language of commerce. And so they started a language called Koine Greek. Basically just means common Greek. And from then up until about the 1400s, that language was the language of legal terms. It was the language of commerce. People all over the known world could speak it. They could write it. And it also became an important part of what God was going to do later. The second thing God did in the 400 years is he started another empire after Alexander the Great and after the Koine Greek kind of took over the entire world. And that was a guy was actually the Roman Empire. And they did two things. One, they developed a road system that went all over the known world. Before that time, you couldn't travel from one country to the other. They laid out, it was the first toll road that everyone, you thought it was in Oklahoma. It wasn't. The Roman Empire did it, okay? And it's called the Turner Turnpike. No, it wasn't. Appian Way. And so commerce was able to travel on that roads all over the world. And then they, through force of their army, they established what was called Pax Romana, which basically means Roman peace. And so it was safe to travel those roads. 400 years, God was not silent, but he was preparing. He was doing things behind the scenes that nobody else saw. Everybody else thought, there's no word. There's nothing going on. But God was preparing the world that his Messiah might be able to come into it. And then the good news about him being the light of the world could spread throughout the known world. So, what did God do in his silence? Well, first of all, he was preparing things so that we could realize our purpose and our vision, the vision that he has for us and the dreams that he has for us. And in your silence right now at this Christmas, what God may be doing is behind the scenes, preparing some things, preparing the stage so that you can fulfill the purposes that he has created you for. You just don't know that. And while you're doubting God, he wants you to lean into him during that time. So what do you and I do during those silent times? We do just exactly that. We lean in. We realize that God is with us. He is Emmanuel. And he's going to walk with us. Even though we may not see his hand, he asks us to trust his heart. And what's his heart? Well, Malachi, the last thing he said was, I loved you. I have always loved you. I loved you from the moment I saw you before you were even born. I still love you. I will continue to love you. Lean into me and know that I'm not absent, even though I may be silent. I don't know what the silence of God may be in your life tonight. But I do know that whatever that silence is, he's not inactive. And he's still loving you. And he's preparing some things for you if you will just lean